Welcome back. Thanks for staying with us here on In Focus. Rights advocacy organization Human Rights Watch has highlighted 3 places that top their long list of concerns for the coming year. Ethiopia region, Tigray region, Myanmar as well as Sudan. This Thursday, the advocacy group released its annual report chronicling the human rights situations in roughly 100 countries where it works, from Afghanistan to Zimbabwe. Its advocacy director in the Africa region, Carine Kaneza Nantulya, joins us now to unpack this a little bit further. Carine, good to have you with us tonight here on In Focus. Ethiopia, Myanmar as well as Sudan. Why are these areas of concern topping your list?
Thank you for inviting me. Again, I would like to just flag that our report, our world report, is dedicated to the memory of Dewa Mavinga, whose voice I'm sure you know, our Southern Africa director, who oversaw and supported a broad range of work in the region around issues of political repression, forced evictions of indigenous people, violence and discrimination. I just wanted to take a moment to share that with you and all your audience. Why Ethiopia and Sudan and Myanmar? Of course, in the Africa division, we do not, Myanmar is not part of the sub-Saharan African region, but of course, most of the issues and human rights abuses that have occurred in the last many years in Myanmar find echo in Sudan and Ethiopia. In Ethiopia, as you know, most of our focus really has been on documenting and researching the consequences that have been devastating for civilians throughout northern Ethiopia and beyond. And obviously the risk for the broader Horn of Africa region cannot be understated. Same thing when you look at what's been happening in Sudan with the abuse of force by security forces, the recent resignation of Prime Minister Hamdok. Going back to Ethiopia, we've documented how the government forces and their allies, including forces from neighboring Eritrea, committed large-scale massacres, widespread sexual violence, forced displacement, indiscriminate shelling, pillage, and attacks on schools and hospitals during the conflict's first 9 months in the Tigray region. And from July, the conflict spread into Amhara and the Afar regions, where Tigrayan forces were also implicated in serious abuses, including summary executions against Amhara civilians and alleged rape cases. An important issue that one needs to keep in mind as well is that for over 6 months now, the government has imposed an effective siege on Tigray, blocking virtually all humanitarian aid from reaching the region and preventing people from accessing food, medicine, cash, and fuel. And this amount to clear violations of international humanitarian law, including possibly war crimes and using starvation as a weapon of war. We are encouraged by the UN Human Rights Council decision in December to deploy an international commission of human rights experts on Ethiopia, which could pave the way for accountability. Yeah. Now it needs to be set up, and that obviously requires more important work to be done.
Yeah. However, you have also reserved some rather strong criticism for Western governments. Kenneth Roth, one of your executive directors, saying they are, of course, to blame to an extent because they continue to promote investment deals and conduct arms sales in countries seen to be violating human rights.
Indeed, because obviously when you know that since 2020, civilians have borne the brunt of the war. As we speak right now, we still have indiscriminate airstrikes by the federal government, and that needs to be addressed.
How do we begin then to address democracies in the African continent around these particular issues of human rights, and so that we don't constantly find ourselves in situations, for example, where we are areas of concern, how we should conduct our politics and how we should conduct our governance?
I think it's a number of things that we need to do. First, one of the most important issue is obviously to build political consensus amongst like-minded governments, whether in the African region or outside of Africa, to put pressure and to speak out against human rights abuses. The shrinking civic space that we see, the targeted attacks against journalists, activists, political opponents. So this political solidarity is very important. The other element that is critical is to keep scrutinizing, documenting, researching, and advocating with or on behalf of the victims. The third one is obviously what we've seen so far on the continent, the relentless, steady, and sometimes audacious actions by activists throughout the region. Sudan is a very good example, where activists were the force behind the ousting of al-Bashir. And up until now, they're still on the streets demanding justice, accountability, and the return to a civilian rule. You have activists like in the Democratic Republic of Congo, who have denounced the corruption and uncovered malpractices by the government of Kabila. You have activists in Guinea up until now who are still demanding a return to a civilian rule. In Mali, that's one of the most recent examples. So you do have a panoply of resilient actions perpetrated, acted upon by African activists and African citizens, which are worth to build upon.
Yeah. Ultimately, I mean, of course, the goal, and also yourself in releasing such reports, is to change the narrative on human rights on the continent. What can leaders, or who can leaders in the continent who are committed to human rights rely upon for assistance and for immediate and effective response whenever they raise their hands and whenever they see human rights violations?
That's a tricky question. Who are the leaders? We believe that they are people of goodwill everywhere. Sometimes they might not be in the high office. Sometimes these are the what we call the positive deviants in different regimes and administrations who quietly advocate for human rights, justice, and accountability, and for instance, a peaceful transfer of power. We've seen it in Zambia. We've seen it in Niger recently, where there was the first ever peaceful transfer of power. We've seen the resilience of the judiciary, I would say, in Kenya and in South Africa, where former President Jacob Zuma was sentenced for defying the Constitutional Court. So there are examples here and there, and I think the challenge now, I think for an organization like Human Rights Watch, but for the media as well, and for any well-meaning person, is to really build a critical mass in terms of the political will, in order to move the needle and to push the democratization agenda on the continent.
Yeah. Who are the key actors that you are calling upon to actually play a more meaningful role? You know, whenever we see human rights violations, for example, when you talk in the context of the SADC region, they would say, where's the AU, where's the SADC region, or ECOWAS, where is that body? Are these the actors that you are relying upon to play a more meaningful role going forward?
I think that the continent has been able to build resilient institutions such as the African Commission on Human and People's Rights. I would like to remind the audience that, for instance, the African Commission on Human and People's Rights declined, for instance, a request by the federal government of Ethiopia to be to join, to be in a partnership with the National Human Rights Commission in order to carry out an investigation on the abuses committed in the Tigray region, and they cited the importance of remaining independent in terms of discharging their mandate. So that's a good example. Another example, as I mentioned, are obviously the different local and domestic courts. When it comes to the African Union, one of the key players and key stakeholders is obviously the Department on Peace and Security and Political Affairs and Peace and Security that is involved in facilitating, addressing, and managing some of these conflicts and crises. And when you look at what is holding back the African Union, we go back to a very simple issue. It's the issue of the lack of ethical leadership. Sometimes, at the end of the day, the African Union is built on a panoply of African leaders who have been who have been very strong on branding the issue of sovereignty. Where they fear any type of interference in their domestic affairs. But we do believe that with different tools such as the universal jurisdiction, for instance, that some countries might be able to act upon and use in the case of egregious human rights violations. We've seen cases where the region, a good example is ECOWAS, has really stood firm and spoke with one voice. In the case of Mali, for instance, the recent example of Mali, which has been suspended and also sanctioned by ECOWAS. So those are some of the examples that we need to build upon.
Most importantly, then, what are areas of concern for you, particularly around the handling of the COVID-19 pandemic? I mean, you've got overburdened hospitals on the continent, you've got scarcity of resources and much needed intensive care. What are you flagging?
I think what we've seen recently is that against the backdrop of overwhelmed and poorly equipped healthcare systems, as you mentioned, and inadequately remunerated health workers. Let's remember the strikes by health workers in different countries, including countries like Zimbabwe. We have now begun to see a significant rises in COVID-19 deaths and cases in many African countries, especially with the rise of with Delta and the Omicron variants. One concern is that many of these countries have extremely limited access to vaccines and then obviously low vaccination rates. And this lack of access to affordable COVID-19 vaccines in Africa is due in large part to the behavior of wealthy governments and pharmaceutical corporations, which is, again, slowing Africa's economic recovery and further worsening the pandemic's impact on poverty. We've done our research on the rising, for instance, poverty and economic inequalities caused by COVID-19 in countries like Kenya, Nigeria, Ghana, and Cameroon has underscored the urgent need for African governments to put in place and expand existing social protection systems to fulfill the right to social security and an adequate standard of living.
Carine, we appreciate your time and thank you very much for joining us tonight. The Director for the Africa Division of Human Rights Watch, Carine, with us.